I stood barefoot on the gravel walkway, the morning sun casting long shadows across the angular lines of the house my wife designed, her final masterpiece. The letter in my hand was crisp, certified, and full of corporate cruelty. Notice of violation. Your property is in breach of Section 4. B. Aesthetic compliance. Failure to bring the structure into visual conformity within 30 days will result in escalating fines and potential demolition. My thumb traced the embossed HOA seal like it was some kind of royal decree. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but rage. This wasn't just a house, this was her. Every beam, every pane of glass, every floating stair tread was her vision. This place breathed her. The neighborhood had always side-eyed our home. In a cul-de-sac full of beige vinyl boxes and symmetrical hedges, ours stood defiant, flat-roofed, cantilevered, with walls of glass and wood that had weathered into a warm, silvery grain. They called it that spaceship, or the eyesore, never caring that it had been featured in regional design magazines long before they ever moved in. The HOA had left us alone for years. We were grandfathered in. My wife had worked that clause into the purchase documents herself, back when she still wore her signature red-rimmed glasses and could debate zoning law like a trial lawyer. She passed 4 years ago. And now, suddenly, they wanted the house gone? I looked back through the massive front window at the sun slanting across the living room where she used to sketch in silence. A photo of her still sat on the mantel, young, brilliant, eyes full of defiance. I could almost hear her voice, "Don't let them erase me, Walter." I folded the letter once, then again, until the seal cracked. Garrett Mason. That smug bastard had signed it himself. Newly elected HOA President, former real estate lobbyist. I'd shaken his hand once at a neighborhood barbecue. It had felt like shaking plastic. If he thought I'd go quietly, he didn't know me, and he sure as hell didn't know her. They wanted a war over aesthetics? Fine. I'd give them a damn monument. The house sat at the edge of the neighborhood like a defiant punctuation mark. No picket fence, no faux shutters, just glass, redwood, and steel, every detail designed with intention, grace, and stubbornness. My wife, Eleanor, had believed that architecture was poetry in form. She built this house as her final verse. We bought the lot 27 years ago, long before the subdivision wrapped its tentacles around it. Back then, this was just open space and sky. Eleanor saw opportunity. She designed the home to integrate with the slope of the land, to let morning light pour in at just the right angle in winter. She was halfway through cancer treatments when the framing went up. She finished the plans with a tremor in her hand, but a fire in her mind. After she died, I couldn't leave. Living here was the only thing that made sense. The HOA was a non-issue when it first formed. It was mostly neighbors trying to stop people from leaving their trash cans out too long. But over the years, the board became more controlling, more cosmetic. Paint swatches, lawn height, approved mailbox designs. I kept my head down and paid the dues. That changed the moment Garrett Mason took over. He moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago with a too-white smile and a resume full of land deals and backroom handshakes. Nobody asked how a guy like that ended up in a suburb this small, but I had my suspicions. The man had ambition in his veins and a Bluetooth headset glued to his ear. He didn't walk, he strode, always talking about revitalizing the community, elevating property values, and enhancing visual unity. He ran unopposed for HOA president. Nobody wanted the job. His first move? Rewrite the neighborhood's design standards into a 64-page document full of terms like visual cohesion, architectural harmony, and neighborhood identity metrics. Buried deep in it was the real threat: retroactive enforcement for non-compliant homes that compromise collective aesthetic. Translation: my wife's house was a target. I tried attending the meetings, but Garrett had the room wrapped around his finger. Smooth language, stacked proxy votes, and just enough faux folksy charm to keep dissent quiet. At one meeting, when I asked him directly if my house was next, he gave me a smile that made my blood run cold and said, "We're simply reviewing properties that may be out of alignment with the neighborhood's evolving visual philosophy." What the hell does that even mean? I knew what it really meant. The house didn't fit, not because it was ugly, because it wasn't theirs. It was too bold, too unique, too much like Eleanor. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. I stood at the kitchen island where Eleanor used to line up spice jars like little soldiers and stared at the document again. 30 days. Demolition if I didn't comply. Failure to act will result in the board taking enforcement steps including fines, liens, and third-party removal. They wanted to bury the house, and with it, bury her. I ran my fingers along the walnut cabinetry she'd chosen herself. Every corner held a memory, her laugh echoing off the skylight. Our last Christmas, spent watching snow fall through the ceiling-high glass. The quiet strength she carried, even as her body gave out. They wanted me to surrender that? Number, not without a fight. Not while I was still breathing. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige stucco box that looked like it had been designed by someone allergic to character. I showed up early, carrying a folder with my property records, the original variance clause, and a printed photo of Eleanor standing on the construction site in her hard hat. I was under no illusion that Garrett Mason would care, but I wanted the neighbors to see her. I wanted them to know what they were helping destroy. The room smelled like stale coffee and artificial lemon cleaner. Plastic folding chairs were arranged in rows, all facing a little podium that Garrett had claimed like it was a throne. He wore a slim-cut navy blazer, no tie, and that damn Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a lighthouse of smug. He opened with a saccharine smile. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to talk about progress, preservation, and how we honor our community's values moving forward." I raised my hand. He ignored it. For 40 minutes, he droned on about aesthetic integrity and resale uniformity trends. He showed slides of recently painted beige homes and applauded them as examples of cooperative compliance. Then, he clicked to a photo of my house. Now, this property, while historic to its owner, presents a visual discord with the unified design framework we're pursuing. It may have been appropriate decades ago, but it now risks undermining the neighborhood's harmony. I stood up. "That house is a work of architectural significance. My wife designed it. Before you were even out of college, she was receiving letters from the American Institute of Architects. She built something timeless, and it's protected under a grandfather clause you don't have the authority to revoke." Garrett smiled thinly, like I'd walked into a trap. "Actually, Mr. Jennings, Section 12 of our updated charter allows for retroactive review of non-conforming structures, pending a 2/3 vote. We've secured that already through proxies submitted by concerned residents." He held up a stack of papers like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. "The vote passed 2 weeks ago." There was a quiet ripple through the room. A few neighbors avoided eye contact, others looked confused, unsure what they had voted for. I felt my jaw tighten. "You're telling me you changed the rules, voted in secret, and now you're giving me 30 days to destroy the only thing my wife left behind?" He didn't flinch. "You're welcome to submit renovation plans that bring the property into alignment, or apply for a hardship exemption." "Hardship? The hardship is you." A few people clapped. Garrett's smile twitched. "Mr. Jennings, emotional appeals aside, this is about protecting property values. No one's targeting you personally." "No one's targeting me personally, right." That night, I walked back home with my folder pressed against my chest like a shield. The air felt heavier. My phone buzzed with HOA spam emails. I sat at Eleanor's drafting desk, lit only by the glow of the pendant lamp she'd picked out at a flea market in '97, and stared at her photo. They wanted to erase her. But what Garrett didn't know was this. I wasn't just a grieving old man clinging to the past. I was her husband, her partner, and I had something he didn't: the truth and a plan. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed, not right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling Eleanor designed to echo natural light in soft angles, what she called the sky's invitation. It was beautiful, perfect, and apparently offensive to the sensibilities of a man who thought vinyl siding was high art. The letter sat on the kitchen table, still folded, like it was daring me to touch it again. My email inbox was filled with automated HOA fines, $100 per day for non-compliance starting immediately. They weren't wasting time. For a few hours, I let the weight of it all settle. The futility, the rage, the quiet ache of missing her. And under all that, the creeping thought, maybe I should just leave. Then I remembered the drawer, Eleanor's archive. I shuffled into the study, opened the side cabinet beneath her desk, and pulled out the heavy fireproof box we always joked would outlive us both. Inside were the blueprints, rolled tight, her initials in the corner in red ink. Beneath them, a stack of letters tied in blue ribbon, responses from design journals, architecture schools, even a few handwritten notes from students thanking her for changing how they saw space. And then I found the real gem, the folder labeled Landmark Nomination, Draft. It was filled with research, photos, written history, and a partially completed application to the State Office of Historic Preservation. She'd started the process. I'd just forgotten, or maybe blocked it out. Near the back was a clause I'd never paid much attention to before. Upon submission, properties nominated under preliminary review shall not undergo alteration or demolition until the review is complete or withdrawn. My pulse jumped. This was it. A freeze button. I spent the next 3 hours reading through the state website, triple-checking every detail. There it was, clear as day, the landmark and review provision. It wasn't guaranteed approval, but it was enough to stall everything. And buying time was all I needed. That afternoon, I submitted the full application, photos, blueprints, written history, everything. I drove the package down to the State Preservation Office myself, just to make sure it didn't get lost in the mail. They stamped it, filed it, and handed me a confirmation sheet that suddenly felt more valuable than gold. When I got home, I pinned that paper to the wall beside Eleanor's photo. That evening, I didn't turn the lights on. I sat in the sunken living room in the fading dusk, the way we used to, watching the colors shift across the stone flooring she selected from an abandoned quarry. And I whispered to her, "I'm not letting them erase you." The next morning, I emailed the HOA board with a scanned copy of the state's receipt. One line in bold, "The home is now under formal historic review. All alteration demands and demolition efforts must cease per State Code 14.9b. An hour later, I got a terse reply from Garrett. "We'll be reviewing the legality of this maneuver with our council." He called it a maneuver. Eleanor would have laughed. She always said architecture wasn't just about form, it was about fighting for space. And this house, it was her battle cry in glass and grain. Let them lawyer up. I had time now, and I knew exactly how I'd use it. The state's review put everything on pause, legally. But Garrett didn't take that lying down. 3 days after I filed the nomination, I found a red notice taped to my front door. Daily fine increments increased to $250 pending resolution. The envelope reeked of arrogance. It didn't matter that the state order froze enforcement. Garrett was testing me, seeing if I'd blink. The next day, an anonymous complaint arrived. Overgrown landscaping, visual obstruction, unsafe stonework. My lawn was trimmed, my stone steps were stable, but every line of that complaint was copied and pasted into the next HOA newsletter under a section titled, "Community Eyesores, What We're Up Against." And right beneath it, a blurred zoomed-in photo of my house. They didn't print my name, but everyone knew. Cars slowed when they passed. Some neighbors stopped waving. One afternoon, I caught 2 board members walking the edge of my property with tape measures, snapping photos like I was a crime scene. Garrett never showed up himself. He let the paper trail do the talking, bureaucracy as a weapon, but I wasn't idle either. I started small, emails to Eleanor's former colleagues, letting them know the house was in danger. Then I reached out to preservation societies, university architecture departments, and a few of her former students I still had Christmas cards from. The response was overwhelming. People remembered her, revered her. One of her old grad students, now a tenured professor at UC Berkeley, called me personally. "Walter, that house is iconic. She lectured about it. We have slides of her sketches in our archive. If they're trying to demolish it, we'll help, whatever it takes." He wasn't alone. A design historian from the State University offered to write a formal analysis of the home's cultural significance. Another colleague volunteered to connect me with journalists. My quiet home, my sanctuary, became a nerve center. A kind of war room, but it was a different kind of war. I didn't have attack ads or PAC money. I had Eleanor's work, her letters, her legacy, and something else. Late one evening, while reviewing Garrett's emails, he'd foolishly CC'd me on a thread he thought I was too senile to understand. I noticed a small attachment in a PDF, a zoning map. Different from the current one, it had new parcel numbers, changed zoning codes, and a developer's watermark. He was trying to push rezoning through under the radar. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't about visual harmony, this was about real estate. My house sat on a corner lot, the only thing standing in the way of a planned cluster of high-density luxury townhomes. The HOA was just the velvet glove. The developer deal was the iron fist. He wasn't trying to preserve the neighborhood, he was trying to sell it. I printed the map, highlighted the parcel overlays, annotated every email he'd sent using vague language like future-ready conversion and density optimization. Garrett wanted a blank canvas to build his empire. But this house, this wasn't a canvas, it was a signed painting, and he'd picked the wrong man to paint over it. I waited for her birthday. Eleanor would have turned 67 that Saturday, and it felt right, like the universe had drawn a line through all the noise and handed me a perfect moment. Not for revenge, not even for defense, for clarity. I spent the entire week preparing. I cleared the front yard and laid down a narrow path of riverstone leading up to 3 steel-framed boards I built by hand. Each one was fitted with laminated design sketches, newspaper clippings, and photos of Eleanor during construction, helmet on, laughing, eyes lit with purpose. I dug into the archive and found something that made me pause. A photo of her standing on the unfinished roof, fists on her hips, wind catching her scarf like a cape. She looked invincible. I enlarged it to 3 feet wide and hung it dead center between the exhibit panels. I posted flyers around town. Open exhibit, Eleanor Jennings and the home that breathed. Saturday, 10 a.m., 4 p.m. 14th Cypress View. Come walk through a legacy. That morning, I set out a folding table with hot coffee, printed handouts explaining the state-level nomination, and a small placard that simply read, "Architecture is memory made visible. Eleanor Jennings." By 10:15, the first car pulled up. Then another, and another. Some were former students. One woman had driven down from Sacramento with her teenage son. She told me Eleanor had once stayed after class for 2 hours helping her understand how to design for light, not for walls. Local historians arrived next, scribbling notes and snapping photos. Someone from the university's architecture department brought a drone for overhead shots. I could see my neighbors peeking through their blinds like prairie dogs, trying to figure out why traffic was backing up on a quiet Saturday morning. By noon, there were over 30 people on the lawn, and then Garrett showed up. He came briskly down the sidewalk, flanked by 2 HOA board members. No smile this time, just pursed lips and legalese. "This is an unpermitted public event. You're creating a traffic hazard, and it's in violation of State Code 14.9b, I interrupted, pointing to the landmark nomination paperwork, laminated and posted on the final board. While under review, all modifications, including removal of structures or installations related to historical interpretation, are frozen. This exhibit is part of that." He scowled, but before he could say another word, someone started filming. A former student had pulled out her phone and was already recording. "Say hi, Garrett," she said. "You're on video trying to shut down a historical tribute." He froze. Behind me, someone clapped. Then another. I turned to see a small crowd forming a protective semicircle around the exhibit. People weren't just there to see Eleanor, they were defending her now. Garrett's face tightened. His gaze flicked to the cameras, to the professors, to the reporters from the local paper who had just arrived. He stepped back, muttering something about seeking legal clarification. But the moment was already his undoing. That evening, the story went viral locally. Retired professor honors late wife's architectural legacy amid HOA battle. Photos of the exhibit hit social media. One of Eleanor on the rooftop ended up trending. Her legacy, once hidden behind my hedges, was now being celebrated across the state. And for the first time in weeks, I saw it, the tide turning. They didn't just see an old house anymore, they saw her. By Monday morning, my voicemail was full. Historians, preservationists, architects, even former neighbors who had moved away years ago left messages offering support. Some just said simple things like she mattered. Others asked what they could do to help save the house. The local historical preservation office called me directly. A woman named Marisol Jimenez, sharp-voiced and direct, said, "Mr. Jennings, your home's nomination just shot to the top of our priority list. We're sending an assessor this week. In the meantime, it's officially flagged in our system, meaning if the HOA tries anything, they'll be in violation of state heritage protocols." I thanked her, barely managing to keep my voice steady. Within days, a movement formed without me even having to organize it. A group of Eleanor's former students, now professionals scattered across the country, started a Facebook page, Save the Jennings House. They posted stories, old photos, even design critiques she had written on their final projects, many signed with her characteristic looping signature. The local alt weekly ran a glowing profile about Eleanor titled, "The Woman Who Designed Light." It quoted former students calling her a visionary, a mentor, and a rebel who taught us how to bend space, not just fill it. The town began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now slowed down their morning walks to ask polite questions. A few left small notes tucked into my mailbox. "We didn't know, we're sorry." The University of California's architecture department offered pro bono consulting for the state landmark review. One professor, who remembered seeing Eleanor speak at a national design conference in the 90s, suggested launching a petition for permanent historic status beyond just the provisional freeze. Meanwhile, Garrett tried to spin. He sent out an emergency HOA bulletin claiming misinformation was spreading about neighborhood initiatives. He accused me, without naming me, of inviting outside disruption and threatening our community's cohesion. But it was too late. The exhibit had cracked his hold. People saw what was happening now. And then came the leak. One of Garrett's own board members, an older man named Phil who always looked uncomfortable during meetings, sent me an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside were printed emails between Garrett and a local development company. In them, Garrett pitched the entire southwest corner of the neighborhood, including my house, for redevelopment into a luxury townhome cluster. He used phrases like pre-cleared aesthetic non-compliance cases and strategically resolving resistance points. It was clear as day. Garrett didn't care about harmony, he cared about flipping the land. I nearly laughed when I read the line. Once we neutralize the Jennings property, the dominoes fall. Neutralize. like I was some stubborn weed he just needed to rip out. The evidence was airtight, cold, corporate, exactly the kind of thing that made people furious when they realized they'd been played. I scanned everything, backed it up to 3 drives, and sent copies to the local paper, the preservation office, and every historian who had reached out. It wasn't just me anymore. It wasn't just the house. It was everyone he tried to manipulate, everyone who cared about legacy, history, and the right to remember. I wasn't standing alone in front of my wife's house anymore. I had an army, and we were just getting started. The next HOA meeting wasn't held at the clubhouse this time. It was too small. Garrett had to book the town's municipal auditorium, a boxy, echoey building that usually hosted school plays and boring budget hearings. I got there early, but the parking lot was already full. Not just with neighbors, but people I didn't recognize. Students, journalists, architecture buffs carrying cameras and sketch pads. Inside, the place buzzed like a live wire. Garrett strode onto the small stage with his usual fake confidence, a clipboard under his arm, a faint sheen of sweat already on his forehead. He tried to open with his usual syrupy welcome. "Thank you all for attending. Tonight we'll be addressing concerns about recent community developments and ensuring..." I stood up in the 3rd row. "Before you do that, Mr. Mason, I'd like to submit something for the board's review." All eyes turned. Garrett hesitated. "Mr. Jennings, we have a process for..." "You'll want to see this first." I walked down the aisle, slow and deliberate, the folder tucked under my arm. When I reached the front, I didn't hand it to him. I opened it, turned to face the crowd, and held up a stack of blown-up emails, projected onto the screen behind me by a student with a mini projector hidden in her tote bag. The first email popped up. Garrett proposing the strategic redevelopment of our entire section of the neighborhood. Murmurs exploded into full voices. The second email, references to neutralizing the Jennings property. A collective gasp. Garrett turned pale, fumbling for words. This is taken out of context." I shook my head. "Context. Here's context." I clicked the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of the current zoning map and the proposed rezoning overlays Garrett had pitched without informing a single homeowner. A retired city planner I'd contacted beforehand stood up in the back. "This is a coordinated redevelopment plan. It's illegal without full community disclosure and a public vote." Someone in the front row shouted, "You sold us out!" The crowd surged with anger, not just quiet indignation, but fury. I looked Garrett dead in the eye. "You didn't care about community. You cared about commission checks. You used your position to manipulate, to lie, and to erase the people who built this place before you ever set foot here." He opened his mouth to speak, but another voice cut through the room. "Motion to suspend the HOA President pending investigation." It was Phil, the board member who had leaked the emails. He stood up, holding the HOA bylaws high like a sword. Effective immediately. The auditorium erupted. Applause, cheers, even a few people stomping their feet against the bleachers. Garrett tried to protest, but the board wasn't listening anymore. Neither was anyone else. His Bluetooth earpiece, flashing nervously at his temple all night, finally fell silent. Security escorted him off the stage, not with violence, but with the slow, crushing inevitability of a man realizing his empire was made of matchsticks. I stayed standing for a long moment, the emails still glowing behind me, not to gloat, to remember. This wasn't just about beating Garrett, it was about Eleanor, about every architect who dared to build something beautiful in a world obsessed with sameness. As the crowd filed out, dozens stopped to shake my hand. Some hugged me. One older woman whispered, "Thank you for reminding us that history matters." No, I thought, thank Eleanor. She was the one who built something too strong to bulldoze, and tonight, everyone saw it. Garrett was gone within a week. Once the emails hit the local news, it was like watching a slow-motion implosion. The town council opened an ethics investigation. The HOA board resigned en masse, leaving behind scorched earth and embarrassment. Developers distanced themselves faster than rats off a sinking ship. Garrett's polished LinkedIn profile quietly disappeared. Rumor had it he moved 2 counties over, trying to spin his exit as a strategic relocation. But the story followed him, because the internet never forgets. Meanwhile, the town froze the rezoning petition he had filed. Permanently, no luxury townhomes, no bulldozers, no cookie-cutter beige. The HOA itself got restructured under court-appointed supervision. One of the first actions? Repealing the aesthetic compliance clause that had been Garrett's weapon of choice. The neighborhood changed after that. Not the houses, they stayed the same, stubbornly, proudly unique. But the people. Neighbors who had once muttered behind curtains now stopped to chat in driveways. Some even asked if they could help with the upcoming landmark review process. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was real. a slow bloom of something honest, rooted deeper than HOA mandates. 2 weeks later, the Historical Preservation Office installed a small, dignified plaque at the foot of my front walk. Under Landmark Review, the Jennings House, a tribute to mid-century vision and cultural legacy. I stood there the day they installed it, hands in my pockets, watching as the last screw tightened into the concrete. It didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt better. It felt like coming home. The glass walls caught the morning sun just right, throwing soft reflections across the lawn, just as Eleanor intended, just as she deserved. Garrett had tried to erase a memory he couldn't even understand. But memories like that? They're built stronger than concrete. They survive, and so do we. Some mornings, I sit in the sunroom Eleanor designed, the one angled just perfectly to catch the soft warmth of sunrise, and I think about how close I came to losing it all. Not just the house, her, because that's what this battle was really about. Not wood or glass or steel, but the memory of a woman who believed that space could hold meaning long after we were gone. The landmark process took nearly a year. State historians toured the property, interviewed former students, studied Eleanor's original blueprints. They marveled at how intentional every detail was. The way the roof lines seemed to float, the hidden rain chains, the clear-story windows that captured the changing seasons like living paintings. When the final certification arrived in the mail, an official document declaring the Jennings House a protected historical site, I didn't frame it right away. First, I sat with it, quiet, grateful, a little broken, a little whole. Eleanor would have made a sarcastic joke about government slowness, then smiled that tiny, private smile she reserved for moments that mattered. In the months that followed, the house became more than just my home. The university partnered with the Historical Society to offer scheduled tours by appointment. Design students came to sketch the house, walking barefoot on the cool stone floors Eleanor had insisted on importing. Local schools organized field trips. I even gave a few talks, short ones, nervous ones, about Eleanor's philosophy of building for breathability, about how she believed architecture should make people feel lighter, not smaller. Every time I opened the door to a new group, I felt her here, in the way the glass sang when the wind shifted, in the long, low lines that pulled your eyes toward the horizon, in the quiet courage of every young woman who paused to run her fingers along the grain of the redwood, whispering, "She did this." The neighborhood changed, too. Where once there had been suspicion and conformity, now there was a kind of tentative pride. A family down the block planted wildflowers instead of another perfect sod lawn. A neighbor painted their shutters a bold, fiery orange and didn't get a single complaint. Somewhere along the way, people realized the uniformity Garrett had promised them wasn't safety, it was erasure. They chose life instead. Color, different, story, the way it should be. Sometimes, when the last tour group leaves and the house falls back into its easy, familiar silence, I walk out onto the gravel path Eleanor designed to lead visitors toward the main entrance, a deliberate journey from shadow to light. And I stand there, barefoot, feeling the cool stones under my feet, looking up at the house that breathes. The house that survived. The house that carries her name forward, one sunrise at a time. "Don't build for today," she used to say. "Build for the mornings people haven't lived yet." She did. And now, thanks to a stubborn old man who loved her too much to surrender, she always will.